Everyone nice and comfortable?
Yeah.
Yes.
So welcome. My name is John. I'm one of the organizers here at the Palo Alto iOS developers meetups group. I just wanted to give you guys a brief overview of our meetups group, and we have a little bit of resources to give out to you guys as well. So our meetups group, we meet on every Monday at University Avenue at the Blue Bottle Coffee Place. So if you're interested, just stop by on Monday. It's at like 7 o'clock every Monday. So we have a lot of different range of developers, some novices, some really seasoned. So feel free, don't be shy, just walk up to me or find one of the other organizers and then just say hi and we'll plug you right into the group. Some of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about today is where you guys are here. Once a month, we try to have a big talk of some sort. And today we have Blue Run Ventures here hosting us today. So Jeff, if you want to give us a quick intro to what Blue Run Ventures is about.
Sure. Welcome everybody. I hope you guys find what you need here and make yourself at home. There's drinks in the back and pizza and all that good stuff. We're just happy to have you guys here. We're an investment fund. We focus almost entirely on mobile investments, mobile first companies, everything consumer to enterprise. And so mobile kind of runs in our blood, and when these guys approach us, it seemed to make sense that you guys come join and do your talk out of our spot. So yeah, we're a Series A mobile focused investment fund.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you. I saw some scotch back there. I don't know. That's pretty good too. Well, yeah.
Feel free to help yourself.
That's good. That's good. Just don't get plastered. But one thing I wanted to let you guys know is if you want to pay attention to the screen real quick, we have a Google Forms where you guys could kind of sign up real quick. Fill up your skill level. Basically, we have some jobs that are available through our group. So we're trying to spread it out to our developers first before they go public on LinkedIn or Indeed. So just when you have time, the link will be on the meetup page. So just fill up, sign up, and get that job, right? Lastly, before I pass it off, we have a pretty active Slack group. It's very good because you can ask a lot of questions. We have channels for front end, back end, job searching, what have you. So our users are very active. So it's a little different than Stack Overflow in a sense where you have to really format your questions, correctly, or you get flamed. We're not like that. So feel free to just ask any questions. If you want to be on it, just find me at the end of the event, and then I'll add you to the group. Only for $5 or so. I'm just kidding. It's all free, but yeah. Anyways, without further ado, I'm gonna pass it off to Dan. He's gonna give us a talk about front end development.
Thanks, man.
I feel kind of crappy because you mentioned so much stuff about Stack Overflow and I'm just wearing the shirt. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. This is my first talk outside of college, and I'm really happy to be able to talk to developers who can really relate to what I'm talking about. So I prepared this talk that focuses on front-end iOS development, and I think we really want to get started with praising the thing that was just released today and the huge steps that Apple is making forward. So we have the Apple Pro 3 that's been released with Pencil, and it's great to see innovation coming from such a great company. Now on with the actual talk. I wanted, before jumping into front end and describing it as a process, I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of the app development process in general. So you start basically with this concept of visualization where all the brainstorming is occurring, ultimately ending up with kind of like a Photoshop or a sketch, depending on your preference, wireframe of your app as a whole, right? So that process involves a lot of user focus, and it takes quite some time to really get to that final version of what you're trying to do. That then is followed up by where, you know, the developers basically say, okay, well, this is what's really technically feasible, and this is, you know, how we would approach these as at this point the technical evaluation. This is how you know we would approach. You know, these are the tools we're going to use to do, you know, these different parts of the app. They compartmentalize like the login process, the, you know, the different pages of the app, and so beyond that, you know, that's when you get into product iteration. You know, you pick your parts and you know you assign them to different people, and you start running through the massively lengthy process that it takes to get to the product spec that was defined in the first step. Once it's all done, which almost always takes forever, developers are really good at giving terrible deadlines. It's like the one thing we can consistently do. Then it gets to like putting it all together, building out the tests, cleaning up the code, and delivering the product. Then you hear the complaints, then you go back and, you know, through the process. So go ahead and, well, hold on. I actually don't know what slide is next, but basically I want to mention that this is where our focus will be, is in the product iteration. That's where the front end really comes into conversation. This technical evaluation is much more for back end. So if you go ahead. Okay, so I'm going to try to be as objective as possible in this talk. A lot of you know that I have very strong feelings towards the way that I do things in terms of front end. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to be focusing on the product iteration step. It involves a lot, going from basically you pick your module that you're working on as a developer, then you have the back end either built out by yourself or by somebody else. And at that point, you pick a front-end method that you want for that particular module, and you apply it, and you begin hooking things up. So the tools, basically the discussion today will focus on what only tools are available that are stable today. We have heard now of, you know, iOS 9 and Xcode 7 coming out. That's been announced today, and the GM seeds are out there. But like, I'm not touching that. You know, it's still iOS 8, Xcode 6.4, 8, iOS 8, and so Xcode 6 provides you several tools, including Storyboards, nibs, zibs. And then you can just do things all programmatically. You can utilize auto layout, or you can use frame math to lay things out. It's up to you. But it provides quite an arsenal of tools that you can use to build out your front end. And keep in mind, you're doing this. You should be doing this on a module, like per module basis. Like login process, pick your front end style. I don't know, other page, pick your battles and pick the tools that you need for those battles specifically, rather than one whole approach and trying to do it one way. So, like I said, I'm going to try to not hate on any major way to do it. Storyboards seem to be the future according to Apple, but the future is not today. So, how did that get in there? Next slide. All right, so starting with nibs and zibs. Nibs and zibs are like the oldest thing in the book. They were technically introduced in '88 with Next Step, and have, over the course of the last 27 years, really like come a long way. They were officially introduced in 2007, and they're great because they were kind of like this first step into graphic user interface for building out a view, a single view. And you are able to separate. You're all familiar with the concept. Just by a show of hands, actually, could I like, how many of you use Storyboards? Okay, all right, wow. How many of you use zibs? And how many of you guys are the programmatic people? Wow. Okay, so there's a huge trend in terms of. All right, so then a lot of you will probably be pretty familiar with zibs, nibs, however you choose to refer to them. the huge pros of nibs and zibs is that the code is very reusable. You have great separation of basically your views and your logic. So, like, you can really focus on building out a specific part of a view and then incorporate it into your overall whatever you're trying to do. If that's a page, then you can plug it right in there. They work with storyboards. So it's a great way to kind of... the other thing is that they're lazily instantiated. And for those who aren't familiar with the term, basically means that everything within a nib-zib is generated as it needs to be generated, right? So on one hand, this is like really great for conserving processing. Memory management, from a memory standpoint, it's like much better. Because you only get things as you need them. On the other hand, you can run into issues with like latency, right? So like you have to wait for things to be generated. So there's pros and cons to it. A big thing is reusability, absolutely. Like you make one table view cell, for instance, using a zib, and you can use that till your heart's content. And the same with, we're all familiar with object-oriented programming. The idea is build it once, use it many times. Build things as extensively as you can. And so Zib's always provided us with, or the past, 8 years now, wow, the ability to kind of drag and drop things rather than programmatically setting them in place. Furthermore, it had auto layout introduced with it, which was really cool, although it was like hated by a lot of people initially, because instead of like setting just mathematically setting as a percentage or something, you basically establish the distance or the position of something based on a relationship between two elements. So you would say one element's height, its height would be related to the height of another element times some multiplier plus some constant, right? So it's really easy to do using nibs and zibs. You just drag and drop. You can also do it programmatically, but again, that's all code you have to write out. So you got this really cool tool to utilize a visual breakdown. You can actually see what you're building, which is very powerful and makes prototyping quite a bit faster. The only thing that kind of lacks, I would say, is the transition category. Transitions, you're still dealing with having to do them, custom transitions, which almost all apps have at this point. You still have to do those programmatically. So Zibs are powerful within their constraints. It's based in XML. That's actually what the X stands for. XML Interface Builder. God help you if you run into a merge conflict with a zib, because I don't know XML and I don't care to know XML, and it's really hard to differentiate which thing is which. So you might not have some trouble if you run into one of those errors, but otherwise it's a great tool. Next. So the next visual tool that was introduced was Storyboards, and it is similar to Zibs and Nibs. However, it is multiple views in one package, right? And I think that a lot of people jumped the gun on Storyboards and tried to build out one huge storyboard for their entire application, and there are apps that go up to 100 pages, and large storyboards are the downfall of, they're the huge argument against storyboards, What's great about it is that you get this basic concept. It's closer to the person, right? You understand it as everything is a scene. You can define custom transitions. One thing leads to another. You can just see it all clearly, the path from one thing to another. It's great in terms of visually understanding what's going on. However, the way we think is not how things really happen. So by using storyboards, without necessarily understanding what's going on, you are sacrificing some of this under the hood knowledge that could be very valuable in debugging, which is, I don't know about you, but I spend about 90% of my time debugging. So with storyboards, if you're working, one of the big issues that I've found with storyboards is that if you're working with a lot of people, and your storyboards are too big, or your work overlaps with someone else in a storyboard, then you very often can run into merge conflicts. And those merge conflicts are the bad ones, the ones in the storyboard code that you did not write, that the other person didn't write, but you now have to figure out. And so if you're going to be using these tools, you have to really use them intelligently. You have to know that the way that you're applying them is makes sense within the context of your approach. Excuse me. So storyboards are great. Keeping them small helps. Like if you can identify a login sign-up process, that is a great thing to use a storyboard for. Usually like that's one person on that. It's not really a super hard thing to do. Now with parse existing and such. So one person could just set up a storyboard and have that set up the whole login process, and that's great. No one has to come in and mess with it, and you can kind of just pick it up and drop it anywhere you want. And multiple storyboards can work together, which is great. And it absolutely is the future of development in terms of like iOS front end. Apple currently uses storyboards, and a lot of the apps that we're all familiar with utilize basically a mixture of storyboards and Zibs. And they're getting better. They were a lot worse. But they're still definitely missing something. And I'm looking forward to, the day when they do get there, when we can completely visually build out everything that we need to be able to do. I find myself in using, and playing around with storyboards, still defaulting to code, and I don't know about all of you, but I default to code in a lot of situations. Mixing the two can sometimes get a little messy. This is the biggest killer, though, for me, just because when you're debugging, when you're testing, you have to know where to look for certain things, and storyboards can make that a bit of a complex process. Otherwise, great prototyping tool. Very quickly can get things out. The next is programmatic user interface. This is how it was done from like day one. And so anything that you can do using storyboards, anything you can do using Zibs or Nibs, you can do programmatically, because Zibs and storyboards both break down to programmatic anyway. You can actually click onto the next one. I really like this picture, but we have to get to something more. So programmatic is terrible if you are trying to avoid boilerplate. Like, you will spend so much time building out things that, we were having a discussion, Lee and I were having a discussion about this exact topic, and so this is where I kind of state, against my own desire, programmatic views will have you spending a lot of time on things you just do not need to be spending time on. If you have built out a login process or 3 before, please do yourself a favor and do not spend all that time building out a new login process. There are certain things you can just skip, like having to allocate and initialize memory for every single element can get really cumbersome. Doing your own lazy instantiation, while it's very neat and clear, it just eats away at your time. I personally have been doing programmatic user interface for pretty much everything that I do, almost just kind of as a learning experience for myself. That includes transitions, views. it's allowed me, I've recently, I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but I've been using Reactive Cocoa and MVVM as my paradigm with the purpose of basically separating views and business logic so that testing and debugging becomes very clear. So that if I have an issue with my views, I know that it's with my views, and if it's an issue with my business logic, then I know what to do. And it's great for that. Storyboards would just be a nightmare in terms of that. You have it all mixed together in this scene thing. And the other great thing is that I've been able to pick kind of freely between auto layout and frame math. I don't know, how many of you use auto layout here? I assume everybody. Do you guys still use frame math for a lot of stuff? Okay, so frame math is when you do the whole CG rect make yada yada yada. Still pretty useful. Just I would not say best practice. Like if I can do something in auto layout, it's generally the better way to go. Especially now with more devices, more screen sizes. Auto layout just handles those things. It's like one and done, create the relationship, and then create a sequence of relationships, and if they work together very well, then you as an engineer have done your job right, and it will work properly on every device that you need it to. Yes?
I just wanted to interrupt and let everyone know that there is a new batch of hot pizza that just arrived.
Yeah, if you want to get pizza, feel free to get up and grab some. I am totally...
And you guys should enjoy it. And there's drinks here. So, that's all. Sorry, Dan.
No, you're good. The other great thing is that your code is always going to override whatever you do, right? So if you have a zib or something and something bothers you about like how it's doing what it's doing, you just connect it to code and like start ripping away, and code will always override what you're trying to do. It might get a little messy, you might have to be creative with your solution, but at the end of the day, the code rules. And while it is tedious, the performance is undeniably better because less steps are involved in doing what you have written out programmatically, assuming that you're not writing pages of unneeded code, which is, I've seen that happen a lot. So basically programmatic, the world is your oyster, but take that with a grain of salt because you literally could be doing everything and you don't need to be, especially if you built things out before. I'm a developer because I'm lazy. I do things in code because I don't want to have to do them again later on. If I built out one login screen, I don't ever want to build out a login screen again. I'm just going to use that same login screen, change some things up, and re-implement it and sell it for hundreds of dollars. That's just what I'm a professional lazy person. So, and again, by the way, I will be taking all questions at the end, so if you have any questions relating any of this, or I haven't gone over something, please ask it at the end. That being said, you can go on to the next thing. So then the question comes up like, okay, well, now I know that all these tools exist. How do I, for my situation, how do I know what to use? And that comes down to, you as an engineer. You have to be able to identify your situation and understand it well enough that you can say that this tool will help me get to what I'm trying to do in the fastest manner, in the least amount of time required, to code it, to match the product spec, yada yada yada. And a great analogy for this is if I asked you guys what's the best car, you can't just simply say a car. Like, you can't just say like a Lamborghini, because if your job is to be a professional mover, Lamborghini's just not going to do the job. Like, you're going to have a really crappy time with that Lamborghini. You'll look cool, but it's just not going to work. So you have to define the parameters, the context of what you're trying to do, and then you have to make the right decision. And that's why people pay you the money that they do. And like I said before, and I can't emphasize this enough, is you need to be doing this on a per module basis. This isn't something that you can do and like blanket statement say, this is the best way to do it. You really have to analyze every single module as well as you can, and understand really what's going to be the best. It could be one method for one module, another method for another module. It could be a mixture of 2-3 methods. Like, it's not as simple as just getting really good at one, because you're gonna inevitably run into problems if you just try to brute force your way through one method. And unless that's programmatic, like, good luck. I seriously mean it, good luck. The things to consider in approaching and trying to match a front end tool to a problem or a module is the amount of time that you have for that module. So if you have like a milestone that you need to reach within a specific amount of time, or your client or whatever says, I need this within this time frame, that's a huge determining factor. The other thing is complexity. How advanced does it really have to be? What is the level of intricacy? How smooth do the transitions have to be? How defined are all of the assets? How good does it have to look on multiple different devices? How many people are going to be using this on a 4S or something? I don't know about you all. I hate the 4S. It's the only phone without the aspect ratio of the 6 and the 5, and it just drives me insane. So, understanding the complexity, and this is again, Lee, another thing that we discussed is kind of like understanding your situation in terms of how deep of a solution do you need to have, how clean does it have to be is really important. Another huge factor is how many people are you working with. Don't worry about it. Sorry. So with collaborators, we all, I hope, have worked with other people. It's really important to be getting multiple lines of feedback. With working with other people, you need to make sure, especially if you're handing off a project to someone at the end of when you're going to be done with it, you need to be able to say, okay, this is how this all works. And maybe you don't even have that opportunity. Maybe you just have to be able to hand it off to somebody, and they need to know right away what's going on. In that situation, it's up to you to shape your front end in a way that is easily comprehensible to someone else. And if, on the other hand, you're working with other people and you're pushing and you're merging a ton, if you run into merge conflicts, that's time that you're not spending building new stuff, and that you're trying to fix stuff that you potentially don't understand. And that's really where the deadlines are pushed back, is how much time you spend fixing the stupid problems that you create. And so understanding how many people you're working with, how large of a scope of the general problem are you handling, really plays a big part in like compartmentalizing each part and saying like, okay, this is the front end tool that will go for this. Like if you're the only person handling the login process, then then Storyboard is fine. You implement a storyboard. It has the custom animations you want. You can customize the view to your liking. You can do some of the things either using, add some of the modal views or whatever using Zibs, maybe throw some code in there. But as a whole, the navigation of the login sign-up process is, if you're handling it alone, probably very manageable using a storyboard. The other thing then is, this may be just specifically to me, but the paradigm that you're trying to follow. Like, a lot of people follow MVC. I try to follow MVVM, which again separates the view and the business logic, and I do that really as like an investment of my time for later. Like it pays off a lot in the long run. And so if I'm trying to separate and keep my views separate from my business logic, there's very few situations where I can use storyboards because, excuse me, because they are inherently treated the same. Like those scenes, they group together a lot of the business logic that would go into a view and when certain things are presented. So more often than not, if I'm doing anything, I'm doing programmatic and zibs. Because both allow you to kind of separate away from the controller, separate away from your models, and just focus on how does it look? What elements are presented on the page? Are they presented correctly? Are they animating incorrectly? And testing them without data hooked up to make sure all those things are operating as smoothly as they should be. These are all really important things for me as a developer, and they're all things to consider in this process. So I figured the best way to kind of jump right into this is just to use an example. So say you're building like a basic chat app, like iMessage, right? Now iMessage, say we're building as a standalone product, so you need the login process, the sign up process. You need your chats window that consists of a page where you'll have a new chat, or you're creating a new chat. It'll consist of a page where you have your existing chats, if you have any. It consists of the chat windows themselves, where you're talking with people. And then it consists of that, like one of the very specific elements that's unique to iMessage is that little, that cloud that all your messages are in. The other person has their own little cloud, and then you have your own blue little cloud. So and that's a custom element that behaves on its own, has its own kind of dates message in there, has like a slide feature where you can see when the message was sent, things like that. And then you have your friends page, which simply is a table view of all of your friends, and then if you click on one of them, then you get kind of like a page of their name, their company, their phone number, their email, yada yada yada, all that stuff. I mean, you're all familiar with iMessage, I assume. So if you're approaching this and you're responsible personally for every single front end aspect of it, then you want to be able to break it down like this. Obviously, this is a very, very rudimentary breakdown, but you want to be able to break it down such that you understand what the different parts are, and then you can say, okay, well, the login sign-up process, I've built that out to somewhat of an extent. I have I have a small storyboard that I used at some point that just has a username and a password field. And say we're using parse. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm going to use a storyboard for that because that's just a few pages and it's processed. The navigation is never going to get very complex. You either move one way or you move the other way. Not really complicated. And you can just drop that in at any point with everything else. So concurrently, either someone working with you or you can work on it separately, you have the chats. The chats is like a really complex part. It's really going to probably involve every single method. But again, you approach each part of it compartmentally. So for like the existing chats, well, you could argue that you want a storyboard for your whole navigation, a separate storyboard into which you'll drop everything. But the storyboard base will exist simply for the navigation of going from the chats window to the friends window. Like it's a 2-page app. And that's it. And that's as simple as it gets. And everything else you do, you stack it on top of that. Alternatively, you could do it using code. It kind of depends on how deep of an understanding you want to have of that application. But if you're trying to get it out, like having a storyboard with 2 pages is like totally fine, because most of these other windows are going to be their own separate UI views. And so with the existing chats, it's just a table view, and that's going to come with its cells. The cells you're probably going to want to be able to reuse rather than build out every single new one. So something you probably want to build a zib for, because you can still use the the interface builder kind of visual appeal of everything to build everything, and so you can see exactly what it's going to look like. But now you can reuse it, right? So you can get the elements that are always going to be there without having to, like, you can reuse those each one of those chat things and just replace like who you're chatting with, whether or not there's a message there or whatever, those kinds of things. The chat window, or I guess let's say the new chat, right? The new chat comes down, it's a modal, right? It only exists for like a short period of time. And if you choose not to do the chat, then you want it to go away, right? So that's going to be its own modal UI view that you can also build out with a zip. Alternatively, if you are using text messages, you can use Apple's like built-in SMS thing, but I'm assuming that you can't do that. So that is, again, something you'll be able to do with a zib or a nib rather than a storyboard, because there's really not that much, there's nothing to it, right? Like you don't have a process beyond that new chat window. You kind of just enter who you want to chat with, and then you just hit send. That's it, and then it becomes a cell in your existing chats. So the chat window itself can be a base level zib as well, or it can be done programmatically depending on how complex you want things. I would not recommend a storyboard there, simply because once again, there's not a lot of pages there. You know, storyboards really they exist to be handling multiple views with transitions. When you're thinking about things as single views that you're stacking on top of each other, like, it's okay to have to build out like 1 or 2 custom transitions and then use zibs. If it means that you're not trying to like stitch together a monstrosity of storyboards. And I don't know if any of you have been there. I've definitely been there, and it's terrifying. You end up with this like Frankenstein of an app. This chat cloud, actually, that one little thing, is something that I would personally recommend building out completely programmatically, because it has its own behavior, it has its own look to it, it has a lot of custom stuff to it that isn't necessarily available. You know, like when Apple's building out the storyboards and the nibs and zibs, they're not anticipating this kind of detail. So that's actually a view or a cell, depending on how you choose to handle it, that I would choose to build out programmatically, because then I can understand how it all works within the context of it as a chat cloud, and I can just do whatever I want. I can introduce swipe features, I can introduce, you know, all these kinds of different things that I want with it. Something that will make it my own app. And then the friends page is actually very simple. We already have that storyboard kind of boilerplate ready for us to put our friends page on. So you just have a table view in there that can even be done through the storyboard. And you, upon clicking on each friend, can just have a modal that is a zip, right? Because you're pretty much going to have the same format of information for every single person. You're going to have their names, their company info, their phone number, their email. And each one of those sections themselves can be a zip. You know, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of customizing and really building out the logic to each thing, it really depends how far into it do you want to get, how much time do you have. But I'm hoping that you guys are starting to get how this whole process comes together. It's not super simple. It takes a lot of thought, and very likely the first time you run through it, you'll realize kind of halfway through, you're like, this would make so much sense if I did it this other way. And that's fine, because that gives you a better sense of understanding of what's going on here. The ultimate point here is that Apple is working really hard to give you these tools to make these things possible. So if you chose to do all of this programmatically, you'd be spending a lot of time building out things that, you know, depending on your situation, just are built in as functional, you know, features for table views, for animations. Like the things you should be spending time on are things like the custom animations, the way your app behaves different from all the other ones, because there's tons of chat apps, and that's where you really should be spending your time. rather than the small, semantics of how basic elements work together. That's the talk.